Kasheteh, Book 2 of the Future Kings series. Written, all rights reserved by Seth Gill. Recorded by Seth Gill. Chapter 1 North. Angelina pulled her coat in tighter. What had been a cold breeze around Iroquois Falls had become a steady, chilled wind the more north they hiked, and it was a steady hike. The train had turned from dry earth to rock. There were still patches of dirt, of course, but every time she dug down with her hand, she found rock a foot down. The weeds that grew amid the random flowers had to have strong roots to push through granite and stay alive. Angelina had decided that's what she was, a 14-year-old strong enough to push through whatever hard times life threw at her. Either that or she was the single ram they spotted the second day on, too bullheaded to know when to give up. Look at that, Simon grumbled beside her. More rock. Where's this damn school? The North Pole? Guarded by polar bears? 17-year-old scoffed at his own joke, glancing to Angelina for support. Angelina just sighed and shook her head, so he rolled his eyes and walked faster. Angelina let him outpace her. She was too tired for his negativity just then. Simon's jacket was pretty thin. It was still 2 sizes too big, too, for that matter, and his sweater and jeans were as worn as could be. But he'd refused to let Starman craft him anything warmer. The old wizard had shaken his head at each refusal and stared across at the teen, clearly bewildered. But he'd accepted the refusal. Angelina watched Simon trudge ahead of her, wondering what the point was in holding onto a jacket that held no warmth. It was getting so cold she expected they'd hit tundra soon. Or the North Pole. What would Simon do then? She shrugged, shivering for warmth. Boys could be so stupid sometimes. Watching Simon trudge on, she considered his boots. They weren't any better than hers, and she kept sliding every 10th or 11th step. Gordon had made some good finds in his hideout at the town hall. The coats, boots, toques, and gloves had served them well getting out of town. But like her coat and boots, they weren't doing the job anymore. Maybe Starman could fashion her something new. Birds, Gordon chimed up, pointing off in the distance. Angelina made out 4 small birds hopping along the ground by one of those few weed flower clumps. They might be finches, Gordon suggested. The 10-year-old screwed up his face. But I don't think finches live this far north. I could use some eggs right now, Simon suggested, inhaling deep. Think they'd mind? I think those young ones are the eggs, Angelina reasoned. Already hatched. Simon smiled darkly. Then some fresh nuggets for the pan. As if they'd read Simon's mind, the birds hopped off, disappearing into a hole half the size of their body. Simon grunted disgustedly. Gordon nodded quietly. Angelina sighed some more. Her stomach growled. She patted it as if to soothe its pains. They were eating roots and small berries. Angelina wasn't sure where Starman was finding the berries. She watched them gather roots as they went. There was no mystery, but there were no berry plants. Why couldn't a wizard create food for them? A nice roast would taste so good just then. They could use some clean water, too. The last stream they'd come across had been a while back, and the canteen Starman had given her was running low. She didn't mind a good hike, but she wanted to get to the school and start learning some magic. She'd expected something more. Her body aches that had started in her legs had spread to her back and neck. What was she saying? Even her arms were feeling strained, and every part of her body was exhausted. Her shoulder-length hair was in bad need of a wash. Even it ached for something better. It would get easier, right? How much longer will it be? Simon shouted ahead. Starman knelt, like he often did, to touch near and pat the earth, paying Simon's follow-up glare no heed. The old man's robes were dirty, and they still bore their rips and discoloration from his fight with the Algrenese that night they'd fled from Iroquois Falls, and he'd fought with sword and fire to cover their path. His magic had healed his body, but there seemed no magic for cleaning clothes. Either that or he didn't care. As preoccupied with some unspoken task as ever, Starman glanced left and right and sniffed at the wind. His wispy white hair curled and turned as the winds changed direction, but the stern gaze was fixed on some invisible point. Then, as he often would, the old wizard frowned, stood again, and walked on. You could at least carry your own packs, Simon grumbled on in his sullen habit. These things are pretty heavy, you know. Angelina adjusted her pack, feeling a crick setting in. She told herself it was physical conditioning. Starman wanted to get them into shape, so he'd left them the packs, one each, to carry. At least she told herself that. He does like to complain, doesn't he? Gordon whispered over. The 10-year-old nodded where Simon trudged on, ruefully shaking his head and grumbling under his breath. Angelina hadn't heard Gordon fall into step beside her. If it wasn't the pack or hunger, Gordon continued with a sad shake of his head, He'd just be complaining about something else. Yeah, Angelina softly agreed. He likely would. She shrugged a little. The pack was heavy, and it was tempting to follow Simon into his sullen place. But she adopted Gordon's lighter mood instead. It wouldn't get them anywhere to blame Starband for his shortcomings. It wasn't like they were perfect either. Do you have any idea where we are? She asked Gordon. We are so headed north. I've been following that point on the horizon he mentioned, and it's still there. It's got to be a mountain, right? It's got to be. I think we're near Abitibi. Angelina stared across. What? Abitibi, Gordon explained, scrunching up his nose. It's a lake that's kind of north of town. It'd take us about this long to get there, so it's my guess we'll be there soon. Angelina regarded Gordon with a smirk. And how would you know how far it is to Lake Abitibi? Abitibi, Gordon repeated playfully, Angelina frowning in return. Gordon shrugged. His cheerful mood waned a little. Before my dad left, he resumed, a long moment later, leaving a few words unspoken. Before they left, we traveled a lot, one town after another. He paused to wince ever so slightly. I remember it took us a bit more than 2 days to get to Iroquois Falls from Kapuskasing. Abitibi looked the same distance north on my map as that walk to Iroquois Falls. Angelina nodded, wondering if she should push. Gordon had explained how his parents had up and left him. He hadn't explained more, but he'd brought up the subject. Did that mean he wanted to talk about it now? Are you hoping you'll run into them? Angelina ventured, hoping it wasn't too tender a point, hoping she'd read the moment right. Out here? Gordon shook his head, then shrugged. I don't know, he mumbled, adding in a quick in and exhale. It's been so long now, I just don't know. Angelina accepted that much. She let the silence settle for a time. So you think that's a mountain we're aimed for or not? She finally asked. Could be. The map was pretty plain. It was old and faded too, and there was a water stain that covered up what finer details it did offer. I don't know the actual geography up here. Angelina sighed. Oh, I do know there isn't much except a few lakes, then the bay, Gordon continued, adjusting his pack straps and stifling a yawn. It's pretty desolate terrain. I'm wondering where they'd hide a school up here. Yeah, me too. Starband stopped ahead and lifted his chin, eyes closed. The three youths stopped where they were. Even Angelina had to frown at this. Starband had saved their lives. She owed him a lot, but he was turning out to be more than a little strange. We'll rest here, Starband announced in his own tired voice. The old wizard turned, stretching out his back, working out his own kinks. Simon, there are some eggs in the nest over there. Be so kind, would you? Simon, Angelina, and Gordon all stared left. All Angelina saw was more flat, rocky terrain. Where's the nest? It was clear Simon and Gordon were equally skeptical. Angelina, Gordon, you two can gather us some firewood from the logs just over that rise. Starband continued with a short nod. I'll go secure the shelter. Starband took a few steps forwards before seemingly walking down into pure rock. The three youths hurried after him, coming up to a hidden burrow of sorts. Wild boar, I think, Gordon quietly mumbled. What they saw wasn't that deep, but there was a dirt tunnel leading further in. There was an angry squeal from deeper inside, followed by a quick, dying throw. Finally, Starband grumbled somewhere in that darkness. Some protein. Angelina smiled. Things were looking up. While Simon wandered off, mumbling how it was unfair he hadn't been the one to kill the pig, Angelina and Gordon found their way up what Starband had described as a rise. Turning back as they reached a small crevice, nearly a gutter, she supposed. Turning back, they were up a slight grade, but not by much. Inside that rocky gutter was a collection of logs. Most were rotting or fallen in, and bugs and spiders moved about, staking their claim. How'd they get here, Gordon wondered. He glanced about, scrunching up his nose. I don't see any trees, do you? No, but I'm hungry, and we need fire if we're going to cook that thing. Maybe this was a river that dried up. Trees got swept up and dragged down here. I don't really care right now where these logs came from. Help me get some of these up. What do you think? 3 ought to do it? Gordon shrugged. Sure. It took some work with Angelina down in the gutter, plying the logs loose one by one, then lifting them up for Gordon to grip and lean out over the gutter's lip. Angelina and Gordon would then work together to drag them up and out to roll back down, as luck would have it, towards the uncovered and now open for camping burrow. The fact that these logs were bug-ridden and more supple than rigid made their job that much easier. Starband accepted the logs with a careful bob of his head. He knelt before the burrow in his robes, now more earthen than before, and held a breath. Mosa ini okos, the old wizard essentially exhaled, puffing up his cheeks at the same time. The withered, mildewy logs firmed up. Soggy wood became as new with knots and bright cedar bark. Bugs streamed out from inside for parts unknown as internal cracking grew. The sound was a lot like that of bones reforming. That sound slowed as the logs' insides filled in with solid ringed wood. Though she'd just seen the logs long dead, Angelina could have sworn they'd been just chopped down the very day. Making a fist, Starvin then nodded stiffly. Karik, he barked harshly. The healthy logs shattered into more manageable splinters, and smaller chunks made fine piles of burnable wood. Set up a fire pit for me, won't you? Starvin asked, wiping his face, visibly drained. I've still got more gutting to do. Gordon opened his eyes wide. Angelina nodded, dragging Gordon back from the burrow in case the 10-year-old followed Starvin in to offer him a hand. She loved meat, but she wasn't about to gut a pig, boar, whatever it was, said meat. And she didn't think Gordon really needed to see that sort of thing. Like they had the last few nights, Gordon and Angelina found a nice natural hollow and set up stones and what kindling they could find. They gathered up some drier wood from the gutter for extra fuel. It would get the fire going well enough. They were just propping up a healthy top layer of log splinters when Simon returned, cradling his coat in his hands. He was shivering badly near turning blue, and his gaze was careful on the ground, making sure he didn't trip. It was clear there was something large being carried in the coat, but it was oddly shaped. When Simon was closer, he laid the jacket down and started bringing out some spotted violet eggs. They were gathered inside his open pack. When all 15 were stored safely away, Simon quickly stuffed his arms back in his jacket and blew in his hands. I don't know what bird they are, he mumbled numbly, and I don't care. I'm hungrier than they are. He shivered badly and hugged his jacket close. Going to start that? No matches, Angelina groaned. Simon sneered. So do what he does. Angelina stared off to the burrow. He told us not to try. She frowned, avoiding glancing back at Simon. She knew he'd just be goading her on. And it doesn't work for me anyway. She stared at the fire pit with a sneer. Thillery, she grumbled, then sighed and shrugged. Nothing ever happens, you know that. I don't even know what I'm saying. Burn this? Give me flame? You're fired? It's no wonder it doesn't work when I don't even know what I'm saying. He won't teach us, Simon grumbled sourly. Some teacher from a school we're supposed to be looking forward to going to. Gordon hung his head. You could always still turn back, he groaned. I still could. Then do it already. Angelina stood with her hands out to stop what could be another stubborn argument. Little spats had been popping up all over the last 2 days at random intervals. They were almost always brought up by Simon's continuous irritating negative attitude. Can't we just sit here and be nice, she urged. We're going to learn magic, and there's nowhere else for any of us except it, she groaned, glaring at Simon. And we're all tired, she added, glancing Gordon's way. Gordon rolled his eyes. We all need some sleep. Yeah, Simon joked. In a bed. Gordon opened his mouth to say something. Angelina's raised finger stopped him. The 10-year-old shut his mouth again, averting his gaze. Simon glanced from one person to the other before crossing his arms and storming off. Gordon glanced after Simon. I'm really getting tired of him. I think he expected a smoother walk and easier, grander welcoming, Angelina reasoned, plopping herself down before the unlit fire. Gordon shrugged, staring at those bare logs. I think we all did. Maybe, Gordon conceded. Maybe he's just been alone so long that he doesn't trust anyone else anymore, Angelina suggested as well. I've seen it happen before. Gordon inhaled and exhaled long. Yeah. Or maybe he's just naturally annoying. Gordon smiled across. Yeah? Angelina couldn't help but smile too. Some people were just naturally irritating, and Simon did the act so well. Why do you think he hasn't taught us magic? Gordon asked, glancing sullenly towards the burrow. I don't know, Angelina mumbled. Maybe he's not sure he can trust us. He did say we aren't supposed to know how to do fire. We just need to show him that he can trust us. Gordon nodded distractedly. Angelina made space as Starvin climbed from the boar's burrow, wiping his brow. Stopping by the fire pit, he smiled and nodded. Thillery, he hissed, and the fire took. How do you do that? Angelina asked. Why can't we do it? Starvin chuckled lightly. There's more to magic than words, he mused, almost inwardly. There's meaning. Unless you know what the words mean, they're gibberish. You could say them all you like and nothing will happen, or worse. You'll get lucky and mess up, and something unexpectedly horrible will occur. Then teach us safely, Gordon urged. Starvin frowned, staring at the growing fire. In time, he mustered uneasily. At the school you will learn. Until then, we must focus on getting there. With any luck, you won't need to learn more than basic survival skills. His nod was too quick. Now let's get eating. Where did Simon get to? Ariasari could be heard demanded in the distance, followed by a guttural growl, then layered swears. Angelina bobbed her head left. He went that way. I can hear that. There's more hiking to do after this before we call it a day. At one point, your bodies will have adapted to the walking required, and you won't need any midday rest breaks. We can really make good distance then. He shrugged, gazing searchingly around. I'm hungry. Gordon patted his stomach, licking his lips. Me too. The spit was soon constructed and transformed from wood to iron by Starbin's magic. Pork was soon roasting over a warm fire. With a quiet mutter, the wind seemed to even bend around them as they sat and ate, removing the day's chill for the meal. Though Simon asked several times how the old wizard had done it, there was no explanation offered except a vague reference to treating air as a wall. When the meal was done, cured meat was gathered, and some sleep was allowed. Angelina found the burrow cramped and crawling with insects that she could only hear, not see, and it smelled awful. She refused to imagine where the boar's carcass lay. She couldn't help but wonder if sleeping in the cold wind would really be that horrible. Fighting her flight instinct, she curled up with Gordon mumbling incoherently at her back. They were all using blankets. Starbin had found them. She drifted off into her own restless sleep. In her dream, she found herself floating above a dry, barren plain. She could hear the sound of footsteps, of marching somewhere close, then distant, then inexplicably absent, but she somehow knew they were still there, hunting. She found herself running, though she had no body, fleeing the footsteps that had no feet, and she rolled over several times before opening her eyes wide. She felt very real panic until she saw a sliver of light from midday reaching in from outside. She remembered where she was and why she was there. A quick glance around found shadowed clumps she took for Gordon and Simon. Hazy senses picked up on Starbin kneeling at the burrow's mouth. He turned her way. She felt exhaustion taking her back down as she closed her eyes again. This time there was no dream. There was just much needed rest.